All right, big announcement. Everyone who's been asking about podcast merch, your wish has come true. We have the merch store is open. I partnered with TeePublic to make our merch because I can't handle another business. So they are handling all the merchandise printing and fulfillment. All you got to do is go to bigtruthpodcast.com/store or just go to bigtruthpodcast.com and hit the store tab at the top. And a page will come up and you just hit the link and it'll bring you right over to the store. We got all kinds of stuff there. There's dumb stuff you'll never need, but because they're a merch fulfillment company, so the world's your oyster. There's all kinds of funny stuff there. But, you know, all the standards are there. T-shirts, long sleeves, summer's coming, you want to rep in a tank top. There's tank tops, there's crew necks, hoodies, baseball shirts, kids stuff, coffee mugs, travel mugs, whatever, phone cases, dumb stuff like I was saying. So check it out, bigtruth.com. Hit the store, link at the top there, and go on your way. You can get lost on the store there forever. There's 3 designs right now, more coming soon. Also, big shout out to my homie Pub from upstate New York. He is the latest Patreon subscriber. I forgot to shout him out last time, but big shout out to my brother Pub, holding it down in upstate New York, Buffalo, home of the wings, right? You got to check out his family's restaurant if you're out there. And I'm a jerk, and I can't remember it right now, the name of it, but I will remember it and shout it out next time. Yes, and, you know, if you need any motorcycle-related stuff, parts, apparel, helmet, whatever, come check us out at Chopperhead, 13 County Road, East Freetown, Massachusetts. Full brick and mortar motorcycle shop, not just an online warehouse, full service shop. You know, you need an oil change, full custom bike built, anything in between, we handle it. We also got a showroom and a parts counter and everything. If you are not local, check us out, chopperhead.com, CHOPPAHEAD, spelt in the Mass Holy ways that we practice here. Just check it out, or follow us on Instagram at Chopperhead, and, you know, you find all the links there. Also, if you need some art, you know, you're looking around your garage, your house, your apartment, your cell, your cubicle, you know, wherever, and you notice some holes that you want to fill with some artwork that fulfills you mentally or physically or spiritually, you need to check out tattooflashcollective.com. It's a DIY industry, tattoo industry, art supply company. So what that means, if you want tattoo flash, whether it's for your tattoo shop or just for your house, they got tattoo flash from artists all over the world. And it's run by people involved in the tattoo industry. It's not some corporate bull, you know what I mean? But they also have posters, different art prints on different types of paper. You can get museum quality stuff, you know? And they have books. They got all kinds of stuff. So check them out, Tattoo Flash Collective, at tattooflashcollective.com, or on Instagram at Tattoo Flash Collective. If you use the promo code BigTruth at checkout, you get 10% off your order. I'm going to cut it short here because I'm excited to get on with this episode. It's going to be a good one. I've been looking forward to it for a while. You'll understand when you listen to it. And so without further ado, let's jump into it right now.
Sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
Yes, once again, we have liftoff. I want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the Big Truth Podcast. And my guest tonight really doesn't need an introduction, but, you know, I got to do it anyway. So he's got a lot going on. So I'm gonna try and do this list right off the top of my head. And if I miss any, we'll go back and do it later. We'll add it in later. But he's a yogi, a teacher, former monk, author, explorer, has a podcast or a podcaster, and just a man on a spiritual journey. And you may know him from his old band. He had a band called Violent Children you might be aware of. But, you know, without further ado, let me introduce the artist formerly known as Ray Cappo, Big Ragu himself, my man Raghunath. What's happening, man? I'm stoked to have you here. And I know you're transmitting live from upstate New York, so if we have any connectivity issues, we'll come back with after any brief delays from technical issues. But how you doing tonight, man?
Good, thanks so much. Yeah, the phone service up here always stinks. So yeah, I'll try my best to stay on. I got one bar as it's going right now.
It's all right. I'm just letting people know we might have some issues, but hopefully not. But, you know, whatever, man. But the benefits of living, you know, out in like somewhere like upstate, you know, far outweighs the inconvenience of having one bar. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure it's a beautiful area.
You know what? There's definitely something to say that we've collapsed part of our joy creating a world indoors. Sometimes they talk about creating these cities that are totally indoors. And it's actually very sad because I know just because of I came back late last night. I was in Florida and I got home and I got sort of late in the game and had to take my son to school. And I just had to work behind my computer all day long. Besides a little bit of indoor exercise and a little bit of, you know, infrared sauna I did this morning, I didn't really go outside. And even though I was productive, I was feeling like I had a big plan to go for a long walk today, and I just didn't do it. So I said, you know what? And then it started raining. And so then I just said, you know what? Just going to put on my raincoat and walk outside. And I tell you, it only took about 15 minutes for me to there's something about the connection with Mother Earth and nature. And even when it's raining out, it just makes the mind lighter and you just feel more connected. And I think it's a big thing. I think that's sort of like missing in culture nowadays. We've created an indoor culture where we say things like, I got to spend more time outside. I mean, we are wild beings, but we've created ourselves to be a little bit domesticated.
Oh, absolutely. We're house cats. We're house cats now, man.
We're like lame house cats. Eating lame foods, losing our sense of our animal instincts, and a little lazy, and yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, isn't it wild though? Like, I mean, when I was young, I loved living in the city. Like, I lived in Boston, I lived in Providence, I lived in Atlanta and stuff. And even like Geneva, Switzerland and stuff. And then the older I get, man, I just want to be farther out in the woods. And like now I live about half hour south of Boston in a town called Freetown. And it's like there's a big, you know, 15,000 acre forest here and stuff, and to go hiking in and stuff. And you just feel way more relaxed and connected, like you were kind of alluding to, you know? It's
yeah. Sometimes people grow up in the city and they're, especially New York City, I see this a lot, but they grow up there and they think, yeah, there's nothing outside of New York. I can't go anywhere. What, am I crazy? Am I going to go anywhere else? And yeah, I don't know. I lived in New York on and off my whole life. And then I lived in Los Angeles for 8 years. And I tell you, and then I went back to New York City. And then I tell you, I'm very, very, very over it. Yeah. Especially when you're raising kids too. Raising kids in the city is horrific.
Oh, I can imagine.
And, yeah, you're forced to keep them inside. You can't let them run out. And we never had a TV in the house, but when I lived in New York City, I was forced to get a TV because you can't entertain them 24/7. You can't let them wander. And they have certain parks that they can go to. And the whole thing, for me at least, and for my kids, it was hellish. And I was glad to trade in that television for a creek. Yeah. And that became their new source of entertainment, like sitting at the creek and building fires. That was our thing. So yeah, I'm happy to raise kids upstate. And for me, again, it's just like, it's therapy. We sort of, the tendency is just override those natural desires to be connected with the earth. And we get sort of mesmerized by the city, and at least at this stage of my life. And I don't know if it's me or I don't know if it's the stage of life, but I'm over it.
Yeah, I like being a visitor in the city. I swoop in, hang out, see friends and stuff, and then swoop out.
I'm with you. I'm like a visitor. I'm like a hawk. I just fly in there.
Yeah. Exactly, man.
My mother lives there. My mother's lived there her whole life.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she raised us in Connecticut, but for the most part, she's a real New Yorker, and my brothers and sisters are all New Yorkers.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but I know people want to hear a little bit about your past and, where you are and, your experiences. And we could talk about the book because I'm sure a lot of this is going to be more outlined in the book. But why don't we bring it back to like Lower East Side, New York in like the 80s, man? Like, how did you find your way into the hardcore and like punk, the world of that? And of course, and I was kidding. I was, Ray was in Violent Children, but everyone knows he was in Youth of Today and Shelter and Better Than 1,000 and other bands like that. But I was just giving a nod to Violent Children because I love that.
I wonder what you're talking about.
What's that?
That was my high school band that I played drums in, but I was like, oh, maybe that's all he knows me from.
No, I'm just messing around. I'm from Boston, man. We're ball busters. You know that.
Yeah. So we were... So yeah, this is all in my new book, which is coming out in a week or so. It's called From Punk to Monk. And it basically was my memoir, my story of my life, which I personally, I was like, well, big deal. My life. I was never in jail. I was never in drugs. I was never in rehab. But the publisher was like, no, man, your story's good. You got to write your story. And the more I wrote my story down, my life story, it was, it's been, quite an interesting journey. I got just into, alternative types of music back when, in the 80s, there was nothing but corporate arena rock. And so I would go to New York City where my parents were from. They raised us in Connecticut, but I had older brothers at that point that were living in New York City. And so I'd go visit my brothers on the weekend, and I would end up in the Greenwich Village and the Lower East Side. And I just got turned on to just, it was the 80s. It was like, it was not just punk and hardcore. It was everything was out there.
Yeah.
It was just united by a type of freakdom. And if you weren't like a corporate into Jay Giles band or into, Duran Duran or into like just, regular arena rock and roll, you were a weirdo. You were a freak,
Oh, yeah.
So if you were Susie Sue and the Banshees or the X-Ray Specs or the, Gnostic Front or the Bad Brains, it was just like you were a weirdo. And you sort of gravitated to these parts of the cities where these weirdos hung out. So that's what I did. And then you'd go have a weekend experience, and you'd go back to your suburban high school, and the rest of the people would like have no clue. Just like the insanity that was New York City in 1982 and 83 when I first started hanging out. And it was like, it was sort of like exciting and raw and unpretentious mixed with an element of danger. For a kid, that was always sort of exciting too.
Yeah.
And no one knew where I was going. My parents had no clue what I was doing. And I would just go with a couple friends I knew from my high school. And that's how I learned everything from street smarts to my ethics and, how to relate to people and how to be careful around dangerous people and how to, you sort of like learn it on your own as a child when at any minute someone could, punch your face in for no good reason, or there's people trying to sell you drugs, or you learned a lot that a lot of America struggles with now, like tolerance between people that are different than you.
Sure. And
just sort of accepting people. And again, we were a whole like community of freaks. So you learn just to accept people as they are. And you appreciate it.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's hard when we're not seeing each other. But isn't it crazy the freedom we had before there was like cell phones and like being monitored 24 hours a day, like just the free to roam, like the shit we would all get into, like, you know what I mean?
It's amazing how we ever even met up with each. Like, okay, meet me here at this time. You can't be late for a moment. Yeah, it was amazing how you had to get around. Before there was maps on your phones and Googling if something's open, just pre-cell phone was a whole nother world. And it's almost like we're starting to take it for granted. And my kids who grew up on the other side of it, like they can't even imagine a world without it. I remember once my son I had a big road map in my truck, and my son was, well, what's that? I said, oh, it's a map. And he goes, map? You mean like maps? And I was like, yeah, it's just like maps. except it's an actual
Yeah,
map.
it's the analog version. Yeah.
Odd version of a yeah. So yeah, and the same and back in that music scene was very cool too, because you have all these bands that are sort of starting, forming, like inspiring, and then disappearing, just breaking up. The only thing they left was like they printed 1,000 vinyl 7-inches,
Yeah.
which now the whole world wants because the scene was growing and everybody wants these. And they were hard to get, and then the record collecting fervor kicked in, and then that became a whole thing in itself. So it was a really sort of a romantic time to be into music culture in New York City in the 80s, which was filled with everything from dance clubs to after hours clubs and illegal after hours clubs and cool music and hip hop and street art was, just surfacing and breakdancing.
Yeah.
And it was nice to be. So that's how I got in, and just sort of like as a kid from Connecticut, getting on the train and going up and checking it out. And then by the time I was, 19 or 18, just moving to the city, and that's where Youth of Today was sort of starting from there.
Yeah. That time was so great too. Like I came around like the mid 80s to late 80s.
Okay.
But I remember getting to New York, like we would take the bus when I was like 15, 16 years old, and just trying to get to CBGB's to go to a show, and then sleeping in the Port Authority and catching the first bus home in the morning. It was just wild. And it was like, that was the adventure, just getting there. And like, never mind the craziness once you were there. It was
definitely some type of insane, twisted first pilgrimage to get to the Lower East Side. And we were 16, or 17. It's intimidating because it was a lawless time in New York City too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Literally get away with murder. So you never knew if you were going to be on the receiving end of a beatdown for no good reason. And not just within the punk scene, but the neighborhoods that the music was played at.
Yeah.
It was Avenue A, Avenue B. It was, everything was sort of threatening, but I will say it made me sort of grow up quick. And it the whole scene itself inspired me to be very proactive in my life. I want to make a band, so I'm going to learn how to play this instrument. I'm going to find people to play with. I'm going to try to keep this band together. I'm going to try to get a gig. I'm going to try to book a tour. I want to get my music heard, so I'm going to create a record label. I want to create a magazine for that record label. And it was one proactive thing after another, and the scene was really encouraging in that. And I never took a course on branding or, music business or accounting. Maybe I should have, but I was just forced to learn all those things on my own. And it was a great education.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And like you said, it also sets the foundation for the rest of your life. Like, because you have a different kind of, when we were 16 and making records and you were a little bit before me, like it, and doing all this stuff on our own, like, you got like a weird, I don't know, it's not, you weren't industrious, but like you learned not to count on anyone else for anything. You didn't need like a big corporate record label. You didn't need a big publishing house. You could just do, like I'll just do it myself and keep it here, and
there was something very, very liberating about that.
Yeah.
And you're right, and it did set you up for your adult life, like to become a little bit fearless. And I'm going to just try that. Why not?
Yeah.
And we sort of laugh when we see bands waiting around for management or waiting around for a deal, and we think like, oh, that's sad. That's sad. You're not just doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it helped me out in my adult life, and to this day, I've pretty much never worked for anybody. I've sort of skated through life at 58 years old now and never really had a real job. Hey, and man. I think maybe that's something good.
Sure, man. Yeah, you kept it like punk punk rock, all the way. See, and I know we have kind of limited time, so I'm going to skip around a little bit.
Sure.
And all this is awesome, and I encourage everyone to order the book because I'm sure a lot of this will be extrapolated in way more depth. But a question I have to ask you, just as a personal thing, I know you and Ray. I know you and Purcell were like big time record collectors, and when I was a kid, I was huge record collector, and there was something about that time was magical, again, before internet. Like when you wanted something, you really had to hunt it down, and you appreciated it so much more when you found that rare record. And two things I want to ask you. One, what was like your most, like, I don't know, not to be materialistic, but like, what was the most prized, like, a rare record that you have that you like absolutely loved or like appreciated so much? Because I know this, you know what I mean? I know you're a hardcore collector.
A hardcore collector, and I'm going to steal this. This may sound arrogant, but people collected. But I think between me and Purcell, we turned it into a feeding frenzy because it was sort of like it was only sort of like I knew a handful of collectors, and they were sort of older than me, from an older generation.
Yeah,
it wasn't like it's but when we used to walk around Lower East Side and we used to put want lists up. Like, we want these records, and we will trade our want list and our trade list. And then when Revelation, our record company, started, we started making limited edition things exclusively for trading for other things.
Oh, I know. I had the together on orange vinyl or gold vinyl. I mean.
Yeah. Exclusively to create almost like scarcity so we could trade for things that we want. It would cost us whatever, $1 or less to print, and we could trade it for things that were worth $100.
You guys were like the original Bitcoin, just making your own currency.
It was so Bitcoin. We were just creating our own currency, and it was only to feed our silly record collecting desires.
Who was the G.I. Joe guy? Was that one of you guys, or was that Jordan that was trading for G.I. Joe stuff?
Hold that, I'm about to get there. So you asked what was my best find?
Yeah, or your Holy Grail record that you had.
There was a period of time, I'd say about a year, where people weren't into record collecting yet in the scene, and me and Purcell really were. And so we went through every store you could think of, even obscure ones in New York City, and we picked everything apart. We picked them dry, and we knew what to ask for. And I think the best find I ever got was there was a record store I used to go to, and they had a bunch of weird, obscure live records, like live Devo record. To get something live back then was really unique, a live bootleg LP.
Sure.
So you had to go to weird stores. So they're weird punk stores. They didn't necessarily sell hardcore records, but it was all sort of mixed up. And they had thousands of singles on the wall that you couldn't really see. You had to like ask for something, and they'd go through them. And I remember once thinking, I bet they have a Bad Brains single here. And the Bad Brains single was always hard to get.
Sure. Was it Pay to Come?
Pay to Come. And I went, and he was going through the B section, and then I saw him pass it. And I said, that's it right there, the Bad Brains. And he goes, yeah, I got it. It's $2.
Damn.
And how many do you have? And he says, I got 10 copies. And I go, yeah, here's $20. I'll take them all.
Wow. And
so, to walk out with 10 copies of the Bad Brains, and you could just tell the Bad Brains must have brought them there. That was probably 1984 or 1985. So the Bad Brains probably showed up 3 years earlier or 4 years earlier and brought them to this record store, and they just sat on a shelf. And there was still stuff that was just slightly buried under the earth that you could just easily excavate.
Yeah.
So me and Purcell were sort of like famous for just like picking through record stores and stuff like that.
So it wasn't even worth going. You couldn't even go into Bleecker Bob's or something after you guys left because you already left with everything.
Bleecker Bob's knew what they had.
Yeah.
You got to find stores that didn't even know what they had. So there was another place it was on Bleecker Street, but west of 6th Avenue, and I got some great stuff from there too. Just
You can give it up now. They're not there anymore. You can give the sources up now.
I think it was I think it was called Bleecker Street Jazz.
Oh, okay.
I don't know all that, but I had every like punk single on the wall that was sort of weird, hard to get. I got all my X-Ray Spec singles there. I got all my No Fun records there. I got all my Posh Boy record singles there. And then I knew they had a Bad Brains thing too. So every week I'd come in, hey, do you have Bad Brains singles? And he said, yeah, I got the original one with the picture sleeve. I was like, oh, that's the really hard. That's the first pressing. That's a really hard one to get. So he would say, yeah, I have thousands of records back here. I'm going to find it. I'm going to hold it for you. I'd go in every week and ask for this. And then Purcell, because Purcell looks a little bit like me for some reason, he went in there one day and the guy goes, hey, I got that Bad Brains single for you. And he gave it to Purcell. I had 10 second pressing Bad Brains singles, which were rare. He had one first pressing with the picture sleeve, which got my goat really bad.
Yeah. Because that was for you. Yeah.
It was for me. Yeah. But we both had very good rivaling collections. And then I got to this point where, see, I was just a collector of vintage things, period. I collected, 1970s lunchboxes and 1970s like G.I. Joe action figures. And Jordan, my partner in the record company, collected Batman figures and Star Wars figures. And so we thought, and all those things to purchase them, they were also sort of in a demand. It was hard to get them. They were all super expensive. It was over $100 for a G.I. Joe. Back then, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And so he said to me, I said, you know what we should do? We should advertise. We will give you rare records for your old G.I. Joe, Star Wars figures, etc. And I tell you, boxes started coming in.
Damn.
And it was amazing. Yeah, it fulfilled all our material desires. And it's interesting. I tell the story in my book because I used to do yoga at the time, which was really obscure, believe it or not, in 1986. No one did yoga unless you were sort of affiliated with some, Eastern guru or something. But I was really interested in that type of thing. And so I was at some ashram on 24th Street sitting in their library, reading the books. And it asked us, the author posed this question, is your happiness coming from your ego or is your happiness coming from yourself? And I thought, well, let's see, where's my happiness come from? So I'm thinking, well, I like my record collection. And I thought, yeah, I like my record collection. But I said, wait a second, isn't that my ego? And I thought, no, I like the music. But I thought, well, it's not just the music because I never play the records I have because you damage the records. So if you collect records, you rarely play your rare records. You always play, back then you played it on cassette. So we had cassettes of everything we love.
Yeah.
Nowadays, save it on, their iPhone. But back then we had cassettes of everything we love, but we never played the actual records. And I thought, well,
or just that one time to record it,
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, how do I know that this isn't my rare? Maybe I'm getting the pleasure from my ego then, because I'm only getting pleasure when somebody comes over. Some other collector comes over and says, wow, you have the Antidote test pressing. Wow, you have the Kraut singles. Wow, you have the Bad Brain singles. And I was like, I'm getting all my pleasure from my ego. It's got nothing to do with the music. And at that point, it sort of severed something. I was like, this is just a lame version of some rich guy collecting cars and a Ferrari and Mercedes. And I was like, I'm just some lame version of those other materialists. And once I made that connection, everything sort of lost value for me because I was sort of on a spiritual pursuit. And when I realized it's pleasure for my ego, it just sort of like devalued everything. And to this point where the next few shows I played, I took some of those rare records and just started tossing them off the stage.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
And it was, I wrote about this in my book. And you know what? As crazy as it sounds, because some people would say, well, maybe you should have just sold them and used the money for a good charity. Maybe that would have been a smarter move. But what I did, it was very freeing to let go of something. because it was almost letting go part. It was like throwing parts of my ego off the stage. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah. And
Isn't
also,
that's
and also, like I'm like that with records. Like I don't like to sell any of my old records, but if someone I know really wants something, I have joy in like giving them that record. I'm like, oh, if this is gonna bring you this much happiness, like here, dude. You know what I mean? Like, cool.
you know, nice way to look at it too. That's a really nice way to look at it too. You can be that detached. You're going to get some joy out of this. If it's not just sitting in some safe somewhere,
Yeah.
then go ahead and enjoy it.
Yeah, the only ones that I still have some like my father called me and was like, "You got to get some of your stuff out of the attic at his old house," and I found a bunch of my records, but I still have like test presses of like I got them from like the guitarist of the Necros when I was a kid, like a test press of one of the Necros, the Conquest for Death 7-inch, and a test press of the Process of Elimination EP, and all these like weird old records, and I'm like, it's
Wow.
just, the same thing though. Like I'm like, what do I gotta do with like what am I gonna do with this stuff? You know what I mean? Like, and yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
Museum, I think.
Yeah. So, I know we're a little pressed for time, not pressed for time, but like, I want to continue the story on, like, and you started to get into that. Like, how did you start like embarking on this spiritual path? You said you started getting into, how did you even, like, what made you even interested in yoga or hanging around at the ashram, like to begin with? Like, where did that come from?
I don't quite know where it came from, but I found that my like sort of joy to do while living in New York City was I was really into sort of like metaphysical books and books on, Christ consciousness or macrobiotic diets or crystals or healing or fasting or cleansing. And it was just sort of like an interest of mine. And I found that these sort of like ancient books of wisdom, Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, things like that, sort of self-help books. This is what sort of inspired me. And a lot of times they inspired my lyrics as well, because I found them sort of uplifting. And I found like there's a commonality in spiritual paths that as different as they are and coming from such different cultures, they also have a common thread. I think it would do us better as humans to see the commonality in different cultures than to always find the differences in them. And so the more I got into that, the more it led me to India and Eastern thought, which was a little bit more inclusive as opposed to exclusive. And it sort of wasn't a fear-based relationship with God. It was more of a concept like you also have God within you, and God is without and God is within. And I got sort of more and more attracted to the Eastern passion of thought. And then also the Krishna devotees would feed people on the street. So that's how the Cro-Mags got into all that stuff. And the Cro-Mags were great proselytizers of Eastern thought as well.
Yeah.
And Harley befriended me when I was a teenager, and he used to tell me all about reincarnation and vegetarianism and things like that. And so that was another sort of, you gotta understand, like this stuff it just went hand in hand with all our, again, everybody was an outcast. Everybody was a freak. Everybody was a weirdo. And sure enough, Eastern thought, vegetarianism or veganism, it was all weird. No one was a vegetarian. No one went to a restaurant and asked for vegan options. That's like a thing of this generation. So you had to be a little bit on the fringe, a little bit of a weirdo to even be attracted to this stuff. And everybody just sort of hung out together there. It was all there on the Lower East Side, from freaky diets to freaky outfits to freaky religions to freaky, hobbies and clothing and shoes and haircuts. It was all there on the Lower East Side. It was one-stop shopping for freakiness.
Yeah. Yeah, before New York was, when New York was still, I don't know how to explain, but I hate the word gentrified, but before it was gentrified, when it was still the people, like, and it was a big mixing pot in there, like, especially that area of town was just wild. And yeah.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't that gentrified there in 1982 or 83.
Or even in the late 80s, even.
Yeah, for better for worse.
Yeah.
What it was. And because I think sometimes because rents were cheap, it attracted people who didn't have that much money. And sometimes those type of the people are the most artistic or most creative.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing happened with Soho in the '60s. A lot of artists and Bob Dylan lived there. So it was the same type of thing. So that sort of travels around.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I know there was like then at some point you kind of dropped off and got like fully into it and became a monk, right?
Yeah, and that also, like, all that stuff is also really explained in my book. But in short, there was, like, my band was doing successful at the time. By the time I had moved to New York City, my father had gotten sick and went into a coma. It was something with his lung collapse, and it was sort of an ambiguous time where, like, is my father living or is he dead? Like,
yeah,
in a coma, they're not quite sure. Is there brain activity? Does he understand what you're saying? Is he a vegetable? And I was sort of left in this, I was left in a type of purgatory of, like, do I love him or is he a vegetable? Do I try to communicate with him? And so it was truthfully, it was a very difficult time in my life to deal with and to even understand. And my mother, who the brunt of it all came on, was visiting him regularly, but she sort of encouraged me to, do my thing, but it still weighed heavy. And I think the heaviness was the reminder that this whole world is temporary.
Yeah.
And this isn't just him getting sick and going in a coma. This is you. You're going to go in a coma. You're going to die somehow. And it might not be a coma. It might get hit by a truck. You might get cancer. You might get shot. You might trip and fall down the stairs and break your neck. But this type of frailty that all of us have, we're just like an eggshell that can crack at any moment. It was sort of like I think like a firsthand wake up call I ever had to come to realize how delicate we are as beings. And then as the band became more popular, I just realized, like, what's the win here? Like, where are we going? It's like, okay, I'm getting more popular, and I think we're doing good things. Like, we're vegetarians. We care about animals. We care about people. We care about, clean living. We care about positive attitudes. We live a clean life. But I know in my heart of hearts, like, I cut out the gross things, but these subtle things in my consciousness that I'm reading in all these books about super consciousness and our spiritual consciousness and our getting rid of resentment and anger and greed and lust. And I'm not doing those fine-tuned engineering of the mind. And I started becoming more and more attracted to that. I was like, how famous do I have to get to actually be joyful? Is there a level of fame? Because I know people who are famous that kill themselves. I was like, what does it take to really be happy in the material world, especially knowing that at any time you could die? And so these were sort of questions that were like racing through my mind as my band became more successful. Was, how do you find lasting pleasure in a temporary world? And it was like this haunting thing constantly tapping me on the shoulder. And when my father finally left my body and we put out our last record, it just my spiritual trajectory sort of catapulted me forward. And I just said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. And the band was sort of shocked, but for me, it was a natural step of who I wanted to become. And so, yeah, pre-cell phone, pre-credit cards, and pre-internet, I, got on a plane and just went to India. Because I always respected India as sort of a hub of spiritual information. And it always has been historically. The Chinese went there, the Greeks went there.
Yeah.
When Greece was in its infancy, there was already universities in India. And, so many people, it was a source of, Columbus went there Columbus came here looking for India.
Yeah.
Just bison for he heard about the spices, he heard about the gold, and he heard about the wealth and the depth of it. So yeah, that's sort of that's what drew me in. And at that point I was just, nothing would stop me.
Yeah. Now I admire that. Just getting on the plane. Really, like, and I don't know, I'm sure you get into this in the book, but like how did you do it? Like what, like, did you have a destination, or did you just fly out and be like, all right, I'm going to trust that I'm going to find whatever it is I need to find?
You know, I think anybody from our generation who traveled, you know, pre-internet,
yeah,
it was a whole different, and again, it was, you know, I didn't have a credit card, you know.
Yeah.
So I just traveled with not even a lot of money. And I was just like hoping, you know, you look at a book and you send some airmails. Hey, I'm coming. Can I stay at your guest house and ashram from this date to this date? You wait for a reply, and then you sort of go on that, but you really have no clue what you're getting into.
Yeah.
It was a much more real sense of adventure. Nowadays, you can just, you know, Google what's the best way to get to Delhi to bring down. There'll be like all these options will come up. You can take a taxi, you can take a train,
and you can have it translate live for you, so you can talk easier to people and whatnot. And
exactly. I mean, and also because I still travel to India regularly, the roads are better, the cars are better, it's safer. There's highways. There were no highways. There was no roadside. You know, if I go to Holy City now in India, there's a Starbucks on the way. It's unbelievable, you know?
Yeah.
And I think before internet, and people have a hard time realizing this if they're not from that era, was if you were to travel to these countries that at that time were very remote, there was they had no access to what was going on in the West except a few magazines.
Yeah, the world was way less globalized. It wasn't. It was
globalized. So fashion was unique to each country and part of their country. Yeah. Like there came a time where even Europe, I remember driving through Germany, and Germans dressed radically different than Italians, who dressed radically different than the Dutch. And you could almost see who was European if they came to America. They're obviously not Americans, because clothing and fashion was we and then it got homogenized, and we live sort of in a very homogenized world, and we're seeing that with our food and our diets and we spread this type of globalism, and I'm sure it's got some benefits, but you miss out on a lot of the flavors that these cultures had to offer as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. I was like, I was an anthropologist, and I had gotten an offer, and, you know, the string of events that didn't come through, but they wanted me to go to Mongolia to spend time with a people that had very limited Western contact, and they wanted to document as much as they could before, because they know, you know, internet and all this stuff is coming. This was in the late 90s, and they wanted me to kind of go out there to do that, but it was like a 5 or 6 year commitment, and at that point I just couldn't do it. But that would have been, it's one of the regrets of my life not doing that one, you know what I mean? But that would have been awesome, you know, and just documenting everything before they get touched.
Because once you get touched by the matrix, it changes people.
100%.
And then you got to work extra hard to get out of the matrix.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's still good locations, and I know you do some I know you do trips out there. I'm sure you still know some like really good kind of like spots that have like retained their
what I do now, and that's sort of my passion, is I create pilgrimages to holy places in India, and you know, even though they're like India's become big. Like I said, there's a beltway around Delhi, and there's 2 major expressways going to the first holy town we go to. And it's like, but because I've gone there before all that stuff was built, I know where to go and who to meet and what to look for. And it's almost like a tour guide, a spiritual tour guide. And also there's customs and tradition. There's intentions to set before you go into a place. there's ways to behave in a holy place, and there's books to read, and there's things you shouldn't do that are culturally inappropriate, or they're just not good for your inner engineering of your consciousness while you're in a holy place. Mm. So that's what I do. I try to set up sort of like spiritual adventures for people, and that's sort of my passion right now. We do that in Nepal, and we do that in India, and then we do a trip in Italy also with my podcast. By the way, I do a podcast. I didn't mention that, but we do a podcast for those who study yoga, want to study yoga philosophy. It's a daily podcast on yoga philosophy called Wisdom of the Sages, and you can listen to it wherever you get podcasts and YouTube. And the cool thing is I do it with a friend who was also from that old New York hardcore scene. We both became Krishna monks around the same time. He got into it in 87. I got into it in 88.
That's awesome, man. Are you fluent? Like, can you read Sanskrit? Because I know you spent so much time. Are you like?
But I can understand Hindi a little bit and speak in Hindi, which is their national language.
Yeah. Because like that the just the writing looks so beautiful, like, and it's like it must be so hard to learn because you're not even using letters, it's like
well, you're not using the
our letters. It's
like going to Japan and trying to understand a street sign. It's like it's not saying first street, second street. It's a whole alphabet. So you're doing a different alphabet, and if you said Sanskrit is the like the Latin of most of the of most languages, but the national language is Hindi. So if you know a little, you can get around pretty easily. But the British occupied India for a long time, and so there's a lot of people speak English.
Sure. I'm just doing a time check here because I know you had other obligations. Is this a point where you need to wrap up?
Yeah, just thanks for good questions. You sort of like breezed through my whole book sort of with a few questions, and it's nice to talk to somebody from that generation of music, because it was a magical time in the music scene, and and I try in my book to tell my story from when I first got into doing music gigs, going to New York City, and what it was like then, and then my entrance into my spiritual life and traveling through India, and then living in an ashram and restarting a band again, which was a real...
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Shelter. That's huge.
Yeah, it was not only peculiar for myself and for the music scene, it was very peculiar for, the spiritual ashram to have a punk band living in their ashram.
Yeah.
But it was a cool time of life, and it turns out to be a pretty informative story in my journey. And I think my hope is to have people find their own journey within my journey. Not that people become me or find my path, but sometimes when you read books like this about people struggling with their demons and trying to deal with their ego, it sometimes helps you mirror your own struggles and your own mountain peaks you want to climb in your life. And that sort of like will be that will be the greatest thing I can give the reader, is if it can help them in any way with the things that they're struggling through. Sure. And maybe get out of some of the pain that I went through by like learning a lesson that I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Sometimes though, that's the only time people are going to learn it. Even myself, sometimes it's like I can read all kinds of things, but I ain't going to learn it till I learn it the hard way. But at least you're open to it, right?
Yeah. Thank
you. What I'm going to do, all your information, I'm going to have your website and like the link to your podcast and the book pre-order and all that stuff on the show notes, so people don't have to memorize it. Like I'll have it in the notes, so just check that out later. I do want to thank you for coming on. I have so many more questions, so I hope we get to do this again, and hopefully sometime like in person where it'll be a little bit easier to navigate. I'm gonna have you stay on the line and hold on one second. I'm gonna shut the recording off, but I'm gonna stay on the line for 1 second. But again, thank you so much for coming on today. This was awesome, and I hope we can continue the conversation sometime.
Thank you, my friend. That was great.